Hi, everyone. As you're coming in, we're just going to ask that you make sure that you're muted, but you're welcome to turn your video on. We're going to have a conversation this evening. As we're waiting for a few other people to join us, if you could just introduce yourselves in the chat and where you're joining us from this evening. And I hope wherever everyone is that this impending spring storm is not dampening your skies. Although I do like a good storm, so you know I could go for some thunder and lightning, maybe after the event is over.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
A couple other people joining us. Just a reminder, as you're coming in, we ask that you keep your audio muted. If you would like to introduce yourself in the chat and where you're joining us from this evening. So as we're getting set up, just a quick reminder that our panel is being recorded tonight. We'll be able to share it out with everyone after the fact. So if you find that you're the kind of person that like hyperfixates during a panel and then forgets half the stuff that was said, I'm not speaking about myself at all. We will be sharing this with you so that you can remember our fantastic conversation this evening. So we're going to go ahead and get started just because we have a lot planned for tonight. Welcome to this phenomenal panel. My name is Ali Krish, and I will be your moderator this evening. I am the Vice President of the Board of Museum Council of Greater Philadelphia, and I also work as the Assistant Director of Family and Camp Programs at the Penn Museum. I'm joining you all this evening from the city of Philadelphia, which is located on Lenapehoking, the ancestral and spiritual homeland of the Lenni Lenape. If you're not joining us from Philadelphia and you know which ancestral homeland you are currently residing on, please share that in the chat. Amanda's going to drop in our community guidelines into the chat feature. While we're having our conversation with our three panelists tonight, we also want all of our guests to have conversations too and ask us questions, but we just want to ensure that we're having an inviting and safe space. So just mind your language and be polite and kind to one another as we're having our conversations. Tonight's program has been planned by the Emerging Museum Professional Committee, which is part of the Museum Council of Greater Philadelphia. Our EMP committee is a fantastic addition to the Museum Council family and provides programs and opportunities like our brand new mentorship program to help individuals that are in the early stages of their museum career to network and develop skills that are necessary to be successful in our field. So I'm curious who is joining us tonight and just where you are in your field. If you're an EMP, if you're someone who is mid-career level, if you could just share that with us in the chat so our panelists have an idea of who we're speaking with this evening. You know, on a personal note, Museum Council has been a huge part of my career pathway since about 2014. I've met so many incredible people across the greater Philadelphia region, and many of those connections were made when I was a part of our committees, like our programming committee. And we do have opportunities if you're looking for ways to get more involved with Museum Council of Greater Philadelphia, and we can share that link with you in the chat if you're interested in applying to join the EMP committee or our programming committee, or maybe you're more interested in marketing or membership. There are many ways and opportunities to get involved with Museum Council. All right, now that the housekeeping is out of the way, let's talk about why we're really here tonight. We have an incredible panel set up for you. We're going to talk about the realities of hiring in museums, ways that you can stand out, and we'll talk about, you know, some of the less polished parts of museum work. Tonight, I'm joined by an incredible panel with some wonderful people from Philadelphia. I'm going to introduce them very briefly, and then they're going to take some time to tell you who they are and their expertise. So tonight we have, if you guys could just wave when I say your name. Tonight we've got Lauren Burnham, the Assistant Director from the American Swedish Historical Museum. We've got Meg Bowmersox, Manager of Gallery Interpretation from the Museum of the American Revolution, and Alexis Patrick, the Director of Public Engagement from Science History Institute. If you guys could just take a couple minutes to introduce yourselves. Whoever wants to go first.
Lauren, go ahead.
Okay, I've been nominated. My name is Lauren Burnham. I am the assistant director, as you mentioned, at the American Swedish Historical Museum. I have a undergrad in history. I went back after 10 years out of being in school for my master's degree just recently, and graduated in 2020 with a master's in public administration. So thank you. That was, something to do, I guess. But it was a really big part of my career that kind of helped me take me to the next level. My master's of public administration doesn't sound really sexy, but it's really about kind of behind the scenes of nonprofit work, and it really helped kind of get a grasp on everything from HR to ethics and everything in between, and budgeting. But I've worked in museums for just over 20 years. I've held lots of different positions, everything from museum assistant, museum education, mostly museum education roles. And now I've progressed to assistant director of the museum. So I am really excited to be here, and thank you so much, Museum Council, for inviting me. I look forward to interacting with everyone.
Cool. So my name is Meg Bowersox, and I work at the Museum of the American Revolution. I'm the manager of gallery interpretation there. That's actually a fairly new role. I got that in January, which is really exciting. But I've had other supervisory roles at the museum before. I am also the chair of the marketing committee at Museum Council. If you want to hang out with me every month and do some cool stuff social media wise, feel free to join me. I'm looking for committee members. I have a master's in museum education that I got from the University of the Arts, and I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts from William Patterson University. So of course, art was really my first trajectory, and then over time working in galleries and the struggles of what it is to be a paid artist, that's a big struggle. The struggle is real. I decided to take up museums, and museums have become my passion. History, again, was not my original passion, but it became my passion after working at the museum. And I do a lot of hiring of our frontline staff members. So that's what I've been doing for the past couple of years.
Cool. So I'm Alexis Patrick. Let's see. My undergrad was in psychology, and my master's is in arts and humanities with a focus on religion, history, and philosophy, which was like an exact degree. My parents were like, so what job is that? Turns out this one. So I actually didn't start in museums, and I started in social justice nonprofits, so like Habitat for Humanity, like that kind of work. And then when I went back to get my master's, I came out and was applying to internships and full-time jobs, but did not think I would get a full-time job in a museum, and then just like got a full-time job in a museum. And then I have not looked back. So I did like volunteer management, a lot of development and fundraising, then like moving into programming. And so now I do programming, I host our podcast. I guess I'm technically in charge of a lot of stuff. I guess our magazine, our podcast, all kinds of creative stuff. And that's the thing I love about the field. I'm a creative weirdo, and now I get like paid to be a creative weirdo. So that's great. So.
Well, welcome everyone. Very excited to see where our conversation goes tonight. I realize that I didn't fully introduce myself either, because I'm sure our guests are wondering why I'm here as your moderator, but I've also been in the field for just about 16 years. And I've jumped around quite like everyone else. But Meg, I hear you are at grad school. I got my master's in museum education from there back in 2012. I'm not going to talk about how long ago that was. All right. So my first question for everyone, Lauren, Alexis, and Meg, whoever wants to take this first can. But at first glance, what stands out to you in someone's resume and cover letter? I'm starting with the hard questions.
To me anyway, I can answer, take the first step. I like to see people's personalities shine through. I think it's really important to show yourself as, who you are, but your interests and how they connect to the museum or the job that you're applying for. I work at the Museum of the American Revolution. We work with a lot of people who are in costume. So when I see people who have an interest or an experience in that, That's something that I really gravitate towards and look out for, but also even people who don't, who just really show who they are as a person and like what they enjoy. I think that stands out the most than something that's just generic.
I would second that. Like, I want your resume to tell me like the facts. I like need the basic information, but like once I've established like, okay, like you could do this job theoretically, then yeah, that's the thing I want to know, because I'm hiring you hopefully to like work with us and work with a team, and I want to know that like you be enjoyable to have in the workplace. So the best way to do that is to give me a little bit of personality.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I really love it when people tell me how what they're interested in and how they're connected to the museum. So for instance, I know I work again at the American Swedish Historical Museum, and that seems like a very specific cultural institution, but I'm not Swedish at all. Like, I don't have any Swedish background. It's not a requirement. You know, you often get asked why you work there, but that's okay. Like, it's still, you know, okay to apply for jobs that might seem out of the box for you, but like explaining in your resume, like, hey, I'm really interested in culture. I love learning about culture. It's a passion, you know, something that makes me say like, okay, you're not just applying for this because this is the 110th job today that you're applying for. And it's not a form thing that you're just sending to everyone. I think personalizing it for where you're applying is really useful. But also, I think people forget the basics sometimes of like, use that cover letter as an opportunity to explain like why you're applying for this job. So like, yes, include who you are and some of that personal stuff, but like, I want to like know some of the specifics like about what is interesting you and about this job, you know, like, or it's an opportunity to explain like if you're underqualified or if you're overqualified, like this is your time to say like, I'm applying for this. I have a PhD, but I know this is a part-time job, but this is why I'm applying. Or, hey, I know this isn't my exact field set or skill set if you look at my resume, but here's how I think I would be really a good fit for this. So like what jumps out at me when I'm looking through things is I'm kind of going through like a checklist in my mind. It's like, do I know who this person is? Do I understand why they're applying for this job? And like, what are some restrictions that maybe I see on the resume, but they can explain it? Like something like they live super far away, or, you know, like, hey, I'm willing to relocate to this state because of personal family stuff. Like you don't have to explain why, but like, just know that, you know, like I might have a hesitancy of hiring someone for a part-time job that works 10 states away, but like, I know that you want to apply because you have, you know, this is something you want to do. So I just think some people forget like just the importance of the basics and like make sure, you know, take this as a full opportunity to really let us know who you are and, you know, why this is a good fit for you.
So I would like to add on to that, you know, a lot of museums, a lot of larger places are using more automated systems for job applications, and a lot of them don't require cover letters. There's also a growing trend with some younger emerging museum professionals to just not submit a cover letter. It's not deemed as necessary anymore. What would you have to say to sort of where you stand on the importance of cover letters, and for people or systems that don't allow you to submit one, how can you tailor your resume to stand out?
Personally, I'm all for a cover letter. I think even if they don't, besides the automated one, even if they don't necessarily require a cover letter, it's always good to put in that cover letter because that's your words and that's you're explaining yourself. You know, a resume can only go as far as to show your experience, your knowledge, or skills, but that cover letter is where you shine yourself through. But I think, you know, there are ways in which you can do that in your resume by like creating an objective or having, you know, your other skills that may not necessarily be museum related on there, but make a cover letter anyway, because that also makes you stand out for the people who are looking to hire those individuals.
Yeah, I mean, all a resume does is tell me like you exist in space and time as a corporeal being. Like it doesn't give me a sense, as all the stuff we were talking about like why you're passionate about this or why you care or what, you know, would make you great to work with or like what stuff you're bringing to the table. It's like, I don't get any sense of your personality. So yeah, I would say always do one. But I would also say that like, you know, this is a creative field and, you know, check out the museum website, but I think there's ways also like in the design and like how you lay out your stuff to give a sense of your personality and give a sense of like, all right, like if you're going for like graphic design and a marketing department at a museum, like, all right, graphic design the heck out of your resume and try to show that off. But yeah, I actually would rather have a cover letter. If I had to choose, I would choose a cover letter over a resume, actually. Because yeah.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And if it's a situation like Allison was saying, where you literally can't submit a cover letter for some reason, like I'm not a big believer in the objective category at the beginning, because those can be kind of formed sometimes. Like my objective is to get a job, or my objective is to be a creative, wonderful person. Like, okay, cool. Like that's fine. But, if you have to, and you cannot submit a cover letter, I think that is the perfect opportunity to really kind of tailor that to you and be a little more and stand out in that section if you absolutely do not have the option for a cover letter.
Excellent advice. Meg, you alluded to this a little bit. I'm not putting you on the spot. Anyone can answer, but you alluded to this a little bit with your answer. And we see a lot of people in the museum field who maybe didn't start out with the intentions of working in our field. They've moved over from, whether it's formal education into informal, or come from the corporate world into the nonprofit. So how can applicants emphasize those transferable skills that we know they have? How can they best show those, even if it doesn't look like a direct one-to-one correlation to like what the job is describing versus what they've done?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, one of the things one of my coworkers or colleagues I have, he's a former CEO, and like all he wants to do is like give tours to people now, and like, but has this like deep passion for the American Revolution, but also is like, he knows how to communicate with people. Like communication, like that's a transferable skill. Even if you worked at like an Arby's or a Burger King, right? Customer service, you know how to talk to people. It doesn't matter what you're selling, you know how to communicate, because of course, one of the most common questions is like, tell me a time where you had a bad experience versus a good experience and how you turn that around. And all of that really has to do with customer service, where you're selling sneakers or burgers, and that can apply.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I
think
I get, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think I get this a lot because the Science History Institute is like, it's a science museum, right? And so people are like automatically either very intimidated, like, oh my God, I did take high school chemistry, but God knows I don't remember. Or they're like, I have worked in a lab for 75 years and now I'm here. And, one of the things I'm always telling people is like, I didn't have a science background, right? But I use that as a strength in my work. And so I think it goes back to what you said early on, Lauren, like it's the ability to like talk about why you have this passion and talk about like what really like makes you want to do this and what you could bring to the table. Cause like you can learn content. I think like, yeah, you can learn content. Don't let that stop you from applying somewhere.
Yeah. And then when it comes to the actual, like putting your resume together and you're really thinking about how to present yourself, I think really consider terminology. So when you're saying like, oh yeah, like you were saying, Meg, like I worked at a fast food restaurant, or like, let's say I worked at a call center for a credit card company, right? Like you could say things like, I have experience in conflict resolution, or, like if you worked at a daycare center, you could say, I have curriculum development and implementation experience. So it's really, I hate the, buzzwords necessarily, but just think about like what it is you did at that former job. And then what are those skills? And then find terms that are pretty universal and actually have meaning to a potential employer that's going to say like, oh yeah, like conflict resolution skills, like we could really use those, or in some way. So like I said, like when you're really sitting down to write it, just think about terminology, because I think that will stand out. Like we said, what are some things that stand out to me as terminology? And I just want to emphasize one more thing: do not leave off things on your resume because you think that they may be too old or might not be the perfect fit for what you're applying for. Because like, I can't tell you how many times like I ended up hiring somebody for like visitor services, and we were just chatting about something later, and they were like, oh yeah, I used to work at this theater selling tickets. And I'm like, why didn't you put that on your resume? Like, that's exactly what you're doing here. Oh, but it was like 10 years ago. Like, tailor your resume to the job that you're applying for, so like, even if it's older in this situation, especially if you're a young professional, emerging professional, and you're building that resume, it's okay to put some older things on there, I think. And I know everybody might have different opinions about this. So, this is just my opinion, but if you think it could be something that has a skill that is applicable to the job you're applying for, don't forget to put that on your resume. It's okay to do that, in my opinion.
If it's relevant, for sure. I would second that. And frankly, like, never feel bad about like what your work experience is. If you survive like working at a fast food counter or like doing retail, like, my God, you could do anything. Like, that is
that's working under pressure,
this
that's
world.
multitasking, that's there's so many things that are valuable from those experiences that someone's going to read it and be like, oh yeah, this is someone that is going to be a good fit here. So just, again, don't forget the basics. It's okay to put those things.
What I'm hearing here is don't underestimate the skills that you have because you don't think they fit.
Yeah.
I think it's good advice to carry through in life in general. So let's dig into this a little bit deeper. I'd like for you guys to think about a time when you hired a candidate who on paper might not have been the best fit for the job, but you still hired them anyway. Just talk a little bit. Why did you choose that applicant? Is it something from their interview? Like, what made you say, yes, this is the one?
Meg, you want to go first?
I know. I feel like all the time we're like,
this round robin. Yeah, so we can just do this round robin.
For me, sometimes that comes down to the interview itself and how people handle themselves. I think, especially when we hire part-time people, there are some people who don't have a lot of experience in museums. But like I said, like working at a customer service or a retail job is like the experience that you need to like run a cash register, to operate a theater. And it's having people, as soon as you can make a conversation with somebody and that conversation is meaningful and that they're just going to click and jive well with the rest of the team, like that matters above all else, like for me in particular when I'm looking for. But I think it's just the spirit and their nature. And if they know what they seem like they know what they're doing and they're smart about it, that can really carry them very far.
Yeah. I mean, I think here's what I will say. We had a really interesting conversation, like maybe, I guess, like into the beginning of the pandemic, like thinking about hiring and about like, what do you say when you have like job requirements, right? And so like we have a lot of defaults, right? Like you need a bachelor's degree, you need this, and one of the things that we did when we started posting new positions is really asking ourselves that question, like, actually, is that true? Does somebody actually need a bachelor's degree or a master's from X program or whatever? Or like, are we closing ourselves off to getting someone who has a ton of great experience or great creativity or great ideas and bring them in from a place that like we didn't actually expect, right? Because otherwise this becomes a loop. You just are constantly hiring the same people from the same places with the same experience, with the same setup. And so like, I think as long as it's like a job that like, I don't need someone to have a specific technical skill to do. Like, for example, like if I'm going to hire you as an audio engineer for like our podcast, like you gotta like know how to do that. But outside of that, I actually have tried to get myself away from thinking about it's going to be this specific kind of person with this specific kind of skill set, and they're going to look like this, and they're going to talk like this and act like this. I want to be surprised, and I actually do want to go through that interview process so you can sell me, frankly.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Like we've actually tried to, again, certain positions, certain things. I'd like to like look at some of our opportunities, like in our visitor services or some of our internships to say like, let's make this more of an equity opportunity. Like is someone interested in getting into this field and they need a foot in the door? Are they interested in exploring this field? Is this something that a high school / college student like that maybe doesn't have a degree yet can be interested in, somebody from, any backgrounds at all. If we can help them, I'm also the volunteer manager. I've managed volunteers for years. Like I always look at volunteering, even employment, as a two-way street. So it's like not just about what you're getting from that human resource or that person, it's what you can give to that person to help them. So it's like, is this going to help them in their career? Is it going to help them decide what they're really interested in? Even if that means maybe it's a little more short term on your side, which it was a hard, constantly training. But like, I really like it when we connect with someone from the community and we can see like a light bulb go off for them and say like, yes, this is what I want to do. Or, maybe this isn't quite for me, but if it's something that helps them build their resume for their future, or, have some kind of career opportunity that maybe they couldn't have gotten if you put bachelor's degree only on there, that closes so many doors for people that, if they see it, they're just not going to apply, but you're missing out on such amazing people. So going back to your question about like, hiring people that maybe don't look great on paper or not what you're looking for on paper, it's giving people a chance to get in the door and then have that conversation with you and really find out how you can help them and how they can help you, which, that personality comes through.
Yeah.
I love that. So that leads perfectly into my next question, which is, all of us that hire pretty frequently, we're trying to at least keep our eyes on changing trends in the field as much as possible. So what are you three noticing as some changing trends and applying for and looking at jobs in the museum sector?
I mean, salaries, listing salaries, like, man, when I started in the museum field, trying to figure out like what a job would pay before you interviewed was like, you're like looking at them, they're looking at you, you're looking at them. Like, it was just like, it was this whole secret dance, which was silly. And like, and even crazier when they'd be like, well, how much do you want to get paid? And I'd be like, how much are you paying? Like, what's happening here? So I love this trend that so many places are willing, like from the get-go, to say, like, this is the salary range for this job. Like, this is what we're paying. Like, let's be real. Let's be upfront about it so that people can make decisions about it. And I think it's also like, it gives people a chance to be in a job long term, because from the get-go, like, okay, this is my earning potential. Like, this is what I'm walking into. And you don't have to waste my time. Like, I have painfully in this field gone through interviews, gotten to like the final interview, only for them to be like sliding the salary across the table and me being like, okay, I'll see myself out. Like, so yeah, that is the best. That's the best change. I like, I'm over the moon about it.
Meg or Lauren, you don't have to feel pressure to add in yet if you have nothing that you want to share.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fairly recent to the experience of having to hire individuals, so I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm the best to answer this question, but I would say salary is like a big thing that I think a lot of people who are looking to find jobs are very, adamant about. And it's just like fascinating to see this this whole world take flight. Know your worth, man. Know your worth.
Know your worth, for real.
That is true. And there is something, I mean, this kind of bleeds into the salary conversation if we're probably going to get there eventually.
We're going there next.
Okay. So this is a change in the field, but I don't know, is anyone familiar with the wage equity ordinance that Philadelphia has instituted now? So I think that this is a total game changer. And so for all of our like people tuning in, if you're in different locations, this really just applies to Philadelphia right now. I mean, I know there's other cities out there. I can't remember off the top of my head, but in 2020, Philadelphia adopted the wage equity ordinance, which essentially means that a potential employer cannot ask you what you've made at a previous position, because as studies have shown that pay inequity because of gender, because of race, these things snowball. So essentially, traditionally women have gotten paid like 80 cents to the dollar to what men have gotten paid. So when you are paid, you start off at a lower rate. And then when you go to your next job and that job says, well, what was your former salary? They're going to take that information and judge like, well, we were going to pay this person 50,000, but they were only making 30. So we can get away with paying them 35 now. And they're going to be happy with that because that was more, but that's less than we were willing to pay them. But you never knew that. Right. So that kind of goes what Alexis was saying about, like, what are you willing to work for? Well, no, that's not how this works. Yeah. So you don't have to tell people when they, if they ask you how much you want to make or how much you've made before, that's not a legal question and you can actually report that. But there was a study from Boston University, I just want to bring this up because I researched it, that actually proved that by creating bans like this, that job changes, it was about 5% overall. People made about 5% more after this change. For women, it increased about 8%, and for Black workers, it was 13%. So, I mean, it really makes a huge difference, and I'm really happy that Philadelphia made this change. Yeah. But it's something that everyone, I think, should know that, knowledge is power. So when you go in there, if they ask you that, that's not something you have to answer.
Right. You can toss it aside. And I'm so glad you brought that up too, about because I'm a woman of color in this industry, and that has certainly been a challenge. And I will also say, I am delighted that we are now having conversations about that in hiring practices, in the way that we approach things. It is when I started in this field, I don't even think that I knew that this was a job. And if you go into a workplace and you can't ever see anybody who looks like you doing the jobs, then it's hard to imagine that this is a career path that you could go down. And so I like that not only are we talking about it, which I feel for a long time we paid a lot of lip service, but also now asking places to put their money where their mouth is, asking them to try harder, asking them to actually deliver results makes a huge difference, because that's the only way this field is going to become more diverse. And I think that's an important part of the work.
Yeah, and laws like this really help close those gaps. And so that way, it's not going to just be this career-long imbalance, and you're not going to be behind that line for your entire career. It's really making strides of making, closing that gap. So anyway, that's, again, just Philadelphia. So.
I love this conversation. I'd like to keep the momentum going to talk with salaries. We're going to just jump ahead a little bit. We'll come back to the interview process itself. But I do think this is a really important thing that's sort of been coming up over the past few years. And one of you said, know your worth when you go into those interviews, but also it's important to realistically know how the field values things. So it's sort of a catch-22, right? You can know your worth, you can go in, but if it's a job that pays $20 an hour, if you go in and ask for 80, the negotiation's not going to go the way you want it. So let's talk some salary. So just giving a little bit of perspective, salary discussions have been considered taboo forever. Older generations, thinking of the boomers who are often in positions of leadership, right? They don't want to talk about money because they're in power. It wasn't polite conversation. But those of us who are coming into leadership positions, those of us that are millennials, younger Gen X, some Gen Z coming up, right? We want to have those conversations, and we've had more access to information. Think a couple years back, we had that Excel sheet that went around where museum workers were putting in their positions at institutions across the country and what they were making, and we were comparing salaries. We could really see these inequities, especially in Philadelphia. We were seeing how a museum down the street was paying 20% less than another museum. So we have information available, and it's really changing that conversation. So I would like for all of us to think about, what norms have been broken down in ways that make it easier for younger generations to talk about salaries, and how do you see that influencing hiring practices and those conversations around hiring practices at your institutions?
Well, I think just Philadelphia in particular, since that spreadsheet had come out, now, the Philaculture website, that job bank now has salary requirements on it. So you can't, as an institution, you cannot get your job posted without that type of a range on there. And I think that's one of the first immediate things that really changes the game for people, because now all these people who are looking to apply for jobs can see these ranges and see what they're looking for and how much that job is really working, and then comparing and contrasting what the number is versus like the actual like job duties and descriptions, and comparing that, which I think is really interesting. And I know, you know, a lot of my friends and colleagues, you know, outside of my museum in particular, but just like in general, are having these conversations about like, you know, well, this job says this, but it's paying this. So is that equal or is that worth it? Which is really interesting to see.
Yeah. I mean, and it doesn't, you might not think this, but on the side of the people who are doing the hiring, it does actually change things. I mean, I've had conversations where I'm like, cool flex pro, we cannot list this position for less than X, right? Because this is what is out there that people are paying. Or if we want to be competitive, or if we really want to like, you know, get like the best of the best, here's like the baseline and here's where we can go from there. So like, it really does matter having that information, like I think available. And it is, I think when I started in the field, it was very much still in the trend of like nonprofit is about, it's about your feelings. You work here because of your feelings. You want to do good in the world. And it was like, it was not only was it taboo overall to talk about salary, but particularly in nonprofit, it was taboo to talk about it because it was as if it was like insinuating that like you might not be here for the right reasons, which was a very like privileged, coded way of approaching nonprofit work, because it's like kind of secretly saying, well, everybody who works here like can afford to like make whatever they want to make because they don't really need this money, right? And so I think I love that the trend not only on the hiring side has changed towards being more transparent, but like I expect like when someone comes to interview for me, I expect that they're going to have a real conversation with me about salary. Like I expect like, you know, I'm not offended if like from like the get-go, you are like, hey, I see the salary range is X. Is there any like, you know, whatever, I have a question about that, or like you want to know before you like walk in the door what the ceiling is. Maybe I'm like unique in that and other places might not feel this way, but like I'd rather know that up front, because I'll be honest with you, I will say like, yeah, no, this is the ceiling. So like if you can't make this work, like don't call me. I'm sure you're great, but like this is what I can pay, right? And I think I think just being transparent about it and having those conversations is so much better and so much more empowering, especially when you're early in your career and you don't have a lot of negotiating power. Like, hey, I've been doing this, you know, 15 years. And if you don't want my experience, I can walk. Like it gives you some power in that interview, and you should have power to negotiate. You should make us come to the table and like, you know, do a little work.
Yeah, like everything that Alexis just said, but really, but I think it's about making an argument for yourself too. Like you, I think you can't just walk in the door and say like, oh, I see this as your range, I want the top, you know, like you, I think, I mean, even if you deserve it, that's great, but you need to explain why you deserve it. You need to, you know, rep yourself and say like, hey, you know, even if you're early in your career, that's okay. Like say, this is my experience. Like I've read your job description. I've read your mission. I know who you are as an organization. Like do your research and then say, here's all of my skills and qualifications. And this is why I deserve to be at the top. So like, I think you really have to put forth that, that argument just to, I mean, it's not even an argument. It's just saying like, here are the reasons why I know I deserve that amount. Because this is what I can offer, this is what I can do for you. And so we'll also kind of get into this, I guess, if we talk about interviews, but it's really coming to the table with ideas and saying like, I have researched this is, I could see these programs happening. I could increase your marketing by this much. You know, I see that on your marketing presence is here and here, but have you thought about doing this and this? Like make them excited about you, make them say like, oh my gosh, like if I could hire this person at this much and look how much we could increase our engagement with our community. So I think it's really, you know, it's an opportunity to make them excited about you and really show why you are worth this money, you know?
I love that. You have to show why you were the best hire for them. So let's talk about interviews. This is a two-part question. I'm going to read it out. If you need me to repeat, let me know at any point. But the two-part is, what advice, sorry, that's not the one. What are the best ways to advocate for yourself throughout the interview and hiring process? And what tips do we have to help make applicants stand out in their interview? Like, how do you craft that memorable interview experience as the interviewee? So best ways to advocate for yourself and tips to stand out.
I think the best way to advocate for yourself is, you know, take your experience and think about how it applies. You know, I think we've said this a couple times now, and think about how it applies to the job and how you can, and I think it's honestly, Lauren, what you literally just said is like, how does like what you bring to the table, how does that help them to increase, you know, whether it's their marketing campaigns or getting, you know, development, more donors through the door. It's being able to think about, you know, what you do, how you do it, and like how that can be applied to make something a little bit bigger and better for the institution you're applying for. And I think for a memorable experience, like you know, some of the best interviews I've had with people when are people just being their true selves. And I'm like, what do you do for fun? And they tell me what they do for fun. Like, I'm a comedian, or like, I make jewelry on the side. Like, something that has nothing to do with museums or the American Revolution is like awesome, because that also shows that like you are just a human being just like me. And like, I play Nintendo. I love Animal Crossing. So if anybody wants to come to my island, I welcome you all. Like, you know, that's a thing that for me makes them stand out. And also when you use the museum's mission like as your driving force in your interview, I think that also stands out to me, because especially, you know, we work a lot with school children. So if you don't have this understanding or belief in the American Revolution, or how, you know, this idea is still like for us personally ongoing, you know, that's something that's like really important to us and to our staff that who all work there. We all share that common idea. So it's things like that.
Yeah,
I love that.
I love that. That is like, I think, you know, it's all the basic stuff, like show up prepared, you know, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, probably advice, right? Like y'all have all heard 1,000 times, but I will say, like, if I'm bringing you in for an interview, I'm bringing you in for an interview, yeah, to learn more about your like skills and whatnot, but also to see like, would you work here? Like, would you be able to work here? Would you be enjoyable to work with? Would you get along with people? Are you a good team player? Like, the thing about, I think about interviews is that they're not only about like your skill set, right? Like, it's not just, I'm going to repeat my resume. It is your opportunity to be like, hey, I'm actually a thoughtful person. So if I worked here, like, you would enjoy like having me around, or I would be a good colleague because, you know, and you're not just saying that on paper, right? Which is one thing that's easy. You can get all the right words. You're demonstrating that. Do you show up to the interview like on time? Are you like, you know, a couple minutes early? Do you have questions? You know, do you like ask for like people's like names, you know, and all that stuff you just said about like, are you like a real person? Like I expect that you have like a life and interests and personalities outside of this work. Like, this is a job. So like, if I know that like on the outside, like you play D&D, which I do, like I'm DMing campaign right now, like, right. Like I want to know that, because that like tells me like a little bit about yourself and your creativity and your personality. And I just like, yeah, I want to know that.
We're all nerds and we just want to be nerds together.
Man, we just,
you know?
yeah, that's all.
Alexis, I think one of the things you just said is really important too for interviewees to remember is like, we're not just interviewing you, you're interviewing us. So ask questions, come prepared. You know, years ago when I was early in my career, I had she's still a mentor today, but she told me, when you're interviewing, ask the person interviewing you what makes them excited to come to work every day. Because not only does that tell you about the culture of the institution and how that person feels about the place that they work, but it also tells you about the kind of person you could be working for. So just remember, we're interviewing you, but you're interviewing us.
Exactly.
All right.
The best interviews I've ever done are like conversations. So you might start off where it's like, tell me about yourself, or like, you know, there's the typical you know, back and forth tennis matches or whatever. But like when that breaks down, I think that that's what makes you memorable to the person interviewing you. They walk away and it's not like they feel like they just got their question answers. They feel like they made a connection with you and like, you know, you're someone interesting to them now. You're not just a name on a paper. And so I know that like nerves are so hard to get over, but you know, my biggest recommendation for interview preps to make it so that it's a conversation is really coming up like, so there's always like there's different questions, right? But they're all the variation of the same basic questions. So if you can come up with like 3 bullet point answers to what those questions are in your mind and practice those answers at home, say them out loud, say like, so like, what interests you in this job? We'll come up with 1, 2, 3. So you're not talking too much and you're not talking too little, right? Because there's a balance there. You're not trying to say like, I like history. You know, you want to have a conversation. So come up with 3 conversational points and then know when you're done, but then, you know, just have those and practice them. And then it just becomes, you're not as nervous because like, no matter what the question is, you know, you can look it up. There's like 20 questions, come up with answers to that and practice out loud. And then it's going to be a conversation and it's going to be memorable. And I can't wait I'm going to ask the question of what your greatest weakness is. And I want someone to say like cake or something, and I'm going to hire them on the spot. You know, it's okay to be a little funny. It's okay to say an answer that's going to make them remember you, or fudge or something that is your greatest weakness. But like, you know, practicing will make it a conversation and make you less nervous and make you memorable, I think.
I love that. So keeping an eye on time, I do have 2 more questions I'd like to ask you guys, but I'm gonna ask one, and then I already see Rachel put a question in the chat. So if anyone else, while I ask this next question, if you could put your questions in the chat, because I love to get to our Q&A. I know that we've listed this event as ending at 7. We're not gonna just like cut everyone off at 7. We can hang for a couple minutes so that you can get your questions out there, unless our panelists have to run away, okay? But this is a question we get a lot. I talk to people when they're looking for jobs, and they just, you know, it can be really tough if you're applying to museum jobs and you're not hearing anything back. So what advice would you give to someone who hasn't had luck getting a job in their field of choice?
There is no job too small. There's no job too small. There is nothing that is like above or below you in some instances. And just because it may not be something in the museum field, there are ways where you can come back to it. You know, so an example is like, say, you know, you are a museum education graduate, right? But then you go and you don't find these jobs, but you get a job at a pre-K school, right? Teaching little children, all the joys that come with that. Who's to say like that experience in those like 3 years working in that daycare center won't help you when another job comes up in a few years when you're reapplying? Because now you've had that experience of dealing with those little children, and like, you know, you can work at an institution that works with that various age group. You know, same thing with like, if you're someone who works, you know, if you're someone who's interested in development, right? But you might go and work a corporate job, right? That's similar to like a development, you know, very similar parallels. So it's always worth it to like veer off and then come back, because the museums will always be here and they will always be hiring in some cases.
Transferable skills. That's what I heard right there.
That is correct.
Yeah. I mean, and it is. So I would say, first of all, it is hard. It's demoralizing. Like, it's a slog. We've all been there. And now that I'm on the other side of it, I'm like, oh, if I could tell anybody anything, it is that one, sometimes when you don't hear, like, it is not personal, I think like now I'm like, oh, I'm a human whose like inbox is full of like 30,000 emails and like here's 16 other things that are on fire, and like I'm trying to like manage like all of those different things. So like don't let it get so much in your head that like you can't, like it takes you out of the game and you're really heartbroken about it. Like, even though it's hard and it sucks, and like I try to be better about it, I think we all do. But I would say it is also worth getting outside perspectives. Like, so there is the situation where like, yes, the field is crazy. Maybe people aren't hiring, like things might be very, very tough. And like but if the door keeps getting slammed, right? I would say it is also worth it to go to an outside trusted source, right? A friend, a colleague, a mentor, maybe even asking for feedback if they're willing to send it to you. Like, and just check yourself just to make sure, like, just to eliminate, like, okay, it's not me. I'm not doing something like regularly that I just don't realize is like putting people off or isn't working. Send your resume to friends, send your cover letter to friends, like stuff like that, because I think it is always good to get an outside perspective. I have edited and like given feedback. I've sent my stuff and people have written me back and been like, honey, okay, I don't know why it says this, but like, you need to fix that. And I think that's good. So
yeah, I think I'm going to say the thing that people don't want to hear. And I understand, because everyone's time is worth something. Everyone deserves to be paid for the work that they're putting in. And I 100% stand by that. But if you're either brand new trying to break into a museum, for instance, or you have a career in a museum or a specific museum, but like, let's say there's another museum that you love and you've applied to and you're just not getting in, or for whatever reason, like, volunteer. I know that, again, everyone's time is worth something, and sometimes people are hustling. They work 2 jobs, they work 3 jobs, they're going to school and working a job. Like, I get it, but like, if you can get your foot in the door, either say, hey, I have time on Saturday, I can volunteer for a special event, or hey, like, I'd love to join a committee. Like, is there a planning committee? It doesn't always have to be on, it can be on multiple levels of volunteering, right? Or maybe you could even volunteer for a board. Like, I don't know, like, there's lots of opportunities to get involved with a place. And I think like the FaceTime and them, it's almost like a preview of your work skills too. It's like a way of standing out and saying like, wow, this person is really hustling. Like, they know what they're doing. And so maybe next time that job rolls around and you put your resume in, they have a face, they know what you're doing, and they know how committed you are. So like, that could help. But I know that's not an option for everyone. I know people's times are limited, but that's just something that has come up before, where it's like, we know this person now. And even if it's not applying for a job there, like, you make a professional connection with their staff. So like, if you're applying for another job, maybe you can use that person now as a reference, and that person knows 10 other people in the field. So like, now you're really establishing a professional network. So even if your time is limited, if you can find any time at all to get involved with the organization you're thinking about joining, or a parallel organization, I think that those connections do pay off in the long run. So it's just like a short term, like, sacrifice in order for the long-term gain.
It brings us back. Oh, go on, Meg.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I agree with you, and I think one of the things that I try to do, especially with the front lines, with the part-time staff members, is like, what are your things I look out for? Like, what are your passions, or what are your goals, and how can I help you achieve those? So if you're interested in like eventually working a development job, like if there's a program that is working with corporate groups, like I'm going to give you that group in hopes that that will help you give some type of training that will help prepare you for an interview down the line. I also got my job because I literally like was nice to every single person in my institution. I started from a part-time staff member at my museum and became full-time because I showed up, I said hi, I talked to everybody, even if they were like from the HR manager to the porter, and like doing that stuff as a part-time staff member and wanting to become full-time, like that is super important because people will remember your face. So I just want to echo what Lauren said, because that's really important.
I love that. I was thinking that comes back full circle to what I said early on in the panel, is that, if you're interested, I mean, obviously there's no promises with any sort of volunteer work you do, but if you're interested in joining a museum council committee, it is a great networking tool to meet people from across the greater Philadelphia region who do work in the field. All right, keeping an eye on time. We've got a question in the chat from Rachel, and Rachel's asking if there's any specific tips for phone or video interviews, since we are living in this post-pandemic world with virtual interaction. And it's really hard to get your personality across sometimes in a virtual setting. What tips would you give?
So I would say that I find actually like the virtual interviewing, like that feels like a better process for me because I am neurodivergent. And so I can like fake eye contact. I can like do all those sorts of things that are like, my God, so uncomfortable to do like face to face, like in person. But I would say like, think about like, where are you sitting? What's your background? Don't be afraid to like acknowledge upfront, like we are on Zoom. Sometimes Zoom is weird. Like, break that ice and have that conversation. We've all like now had like the we've been on Zoom with our friends, we've been on Zoom with our families, we've done birthdays, we've done happy hours, we've done all of those different things, right? And part of what makes them so weird is that we keep trying to like replicate being like face to face in person, and like it's just not going to do that. So like don't try to make the medium be something it's not. I think you can acknowledge what that awkwardness is and take advantage of all those things. Like you can show your personality if you're like sitting in a room and you have like cool stuff on your bookshelf, or like, you know, like there's stuff that you can do. And if you need a minute, I've noticed this on Zoom, it's a lot easier. Like if you need a minute, or you need to take a breath, or you need a moment to like process what somebody said to you, because like virtual, like that can be hard. Like, don't be afraid to say like, hey, let me think about that for a minute, or let me just like process that for a second. Like, I think being more communicative about like the process of doing it on this like crazy, like online platform can help make it less stressful and help you, you know, feel less nervous, but also like get across the fact that like you're a thoughtful, cool person.
I thought you were going to say, when you said if you need a minute, I thought you were going to be like, pretend you froze.
Pretend you froze. Yeah.
and then you can think about it and then answer. I really thought that's where you were going with that. I was like, that's brilliant.
Oh man, dang, I wish I would have thought of that. Actually, pretend that's what I said. Pretend that's what I said.
We can edit that out later.
Yeah.
I would even say, like, even if it's just a phone interview, like there's something about like dressing yourself for the job is like that also will help your self-esteem and will also make you feel like you're actually there in person. It's all about the mindset you bring to it. And I think, you know, smiles, but I love being virtual. And actually, I feel like I shine better virtually in some cases, but you know, I think just like emoting, like everyone has a smile on their face right now who's on camera. Like, so we're all emoting this type of feeling. And I think that's super important. It's just like, again, just like being yourself is like the most important thing, even though it is completely nerve wracking. But yeah.
All right.
The opposite, because you're at home in your own setting, so it's almost a little more relaxing for you, rather than being in a room with 10, 5 people sitting across from you. You're just at least like you can look around and recenter yourself.
Yeah. Like this, I have like interviewed and hired like during this pandemic, and I somebody I hired was like, okay, this cat is here, this cat is rude, I'm just gonna say that up front. Like, and it was like this moment where we could just like kind of break the ice and have that conversation, and it was nice. So like remember, like however weird it is for you, it's also weird for them, like the person who's interviewing you. So like y'all are having like a shared weird experience, and like you can bond over that.
I love that. All right. So one more question in the chat that I'd like to get to, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, but this is from Courtney, and she asked this earlier, and I believe Meg, you were answering at this point, but what advice would you give to someone who lives outside of the state that they're applying to? Like, what's a helpful way to get a hiring manager to take the chance on someone who's applying to work in Philadelphia but may live in Indiana?
Yeah.
Such a weird world.
I mean, I think, as long as your cover letter, resume expresses all that and you've gotten to that interview point, don't, yes, I can travel. Like I can take that train, I can take that whatever to get there, however it may be, and most places will work with you about those hours and that travel. I think if you're going to a completely different state, I had a friend who moved all the way from Philadelphia to Alaska for a job, but I think just showing your willingness to just like go and like be your best self for this experience, I think that is something that's really important. And knowing that, you're there and you're in it 100%, and the willingness to just go is super important.
Yeah, I actually live an hour away from Philadelphia. So like, I mean, just commute wise, so I think that's sometimes like it was a concern for someone to say like, hey, you live really far away, like are you going to be committed to this for long term? And I've worked there for like 8 years now, so I think that But, you know, you don't have to always get super into your personal life. But I think if you can have some sort of justification there for someone to relate to, like I said, oh, my spouse works in Delaware and, you know, I work in Philadelphia, but this is where we could afford to live. That was like the midpoint between us, you know? So
Right.
like, again, you don't have to get really into your personal life, keep it where you're comfortable. But if you can just say something that's like, I really love driving, like I don't mind commuting, or like I really love, you know, public transport, whatever it is, but like provide some sort of reasoning that they can understand that that's like, yes, okay, I understand you're going to be committed to this.
Yeah, I mean, I would have answered this question. I was like thinking this is so weird. I would have answered this so differently a few years ago. But
Mhm.
now I'm just like, well, A, check and see if they're like if it's a remote job or if they have like a remote flexible policy, because in which case, like it
Mhm.
doesn't matter, right? And like I know like that's what we have, a remote flexible policy now. Like that is not, you know, depending on what the job is, you might not actually need to live like right here in Philadelphia. I don't live in Philadelphia, I live in Jersey. And then I would also say like you mentioned this like up front, Lauren, like just like flagging it in your resume or in your cover letter, like, hey, I'm willing to like travel or I'm looking to relocate, like right up front there. But I think like I am assuming now, unless you tell me that you're looking for like a remote position, that like if you are like, I live in New Jersey and I am applying to this job in like Southern California that is not remote, I assume if you get this job, you're moving to Southern California. You have a plan. So I think like you can just flag it and be upfront about it. And I think if, you know, I don't have, I think that's I think it's a whole different ball game now. I think you should check and see what the policies are, and you might not even have to stress about it.
I love all of that. I'd like to add on, I'm someone who hires a lot of short-term temporary positions. So these are like 12-week or less summer positions, and I hire people from all over the country all the time. And the way that like those decisions are made is that when, you know, to Lauren's point, just be upfront about it. Like, hey, I just finished undergrad and I live in Wisconsin, but I'm looking for something to do for the summer. Like that is just a really great way for hiring managers to like, oh yeah, like they're not tied down to middle of the country. All right, we are past time at 7:03. I have one final question that I'd like to leave on, but then panelists, if we could just hang for a couple minutes in case any of our guests would like to stay and ask any questions of you. But this will be the end question that we're recording, so no pressure. But what advice would you give to your younger self when you were first starting out in the field? And I know many of us have decades of experience we can look back to.
I feel like I have been through some jobs. Like I have been through some jobs that have maybe left some scars.
Yes.
But I think that those were important too, and that I don't think I would appreciate where I am now without it. So I think, you know, looking, you know, as an EMP, like I think you should just, you know, go through everything. Like don't say no to opportunities. Like really just take, you know, analyze them and say like, okay, what can I get out of this that I can learn and do differently, or this was great and I want to repeat this at a future job. You know, like I think it's just really taking advantage of every opportunity that you can, and just really learning as you go, and don't be discouraged. Don't say like, that was a huge waste of 2 years of my life or something like that. You know, like you can always get something out of an experience and just move forward with it and look forward to, you know, really positive opportunities.
I love that.
I mean, you know, I would tell my younger self that you are worth something and your mental health is worth something and it is to be valued, and that you can trust your gut. And so if you go into an interview and you see a bunch of red flags and you are like, this place is on fire, like get out. Molly, you are in danger, girl. Get out of the building. I think we've all had some wild jobs, right? We've all worked some wild places. And I agree with you. Once you're there, like you try to get the best out of it. You try to like make the best of the situation. But I would say don't get so caught up in the like, I must have a job and there's no other opportunity, that like you will go into a place that is going to strip your soul and strip your mental health, because it's probably man, the cost of that is high, and like you are worthy of not working somewhere that is gonna like eat you alive.
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo what both of you said. There are, when you're starting out, there are some jobs that are not the perfect fit, but that's okay, because those jobs are actually what prepare you to have the job that you want, and the job that makes it worth it. There are things like you couldn't even imagine, like if you're someone who went to grad school, but like you're the actual person like refilling the toilet paper rolls, right? Like you're like, what am I doing with my life? But that also makes you, when you get to this other job or this other place, like realize to be humble and to understand that in some cases, like, you had that job and you did those things, and now look at where you are now. And like, no job is too little or too small, because guess what? Even if you're in a higher position, in some cases, you still have to put the toilet paper on the roll.
Turns out.
You still have to do those like weird, like, some late night event shifts. Like there are still many things that you have to do, in those higher up jobs that you had to do when you were in a front, a low income like staff member.
Meg, I love that
I had
you
a
said
manager,
that.
like I asked, what is your managing style? And I have taken this with me forever. She said, I would never ask someone to do something I wouldn't be willing to do myself.
Exactly.
And I think that is the best philosophy in life there is.
Yep.
Meg, I love that you said that there's no job too small. There really isn't in museums. And I think especially over the past 2 years, when so many of us shut our doors to the public, think of the staff who showed up every day to care for our collections and make sure our buildings were in appropriate shape for when we did reopen. So there's no job too small in the museum. All of us need each other in order to keep our doors open and be spaces for the community to come in. On that note, thank you so much to Alexis, Meg, and Lauren. This was a fantastic conversation. I've learned a lot, and I hope all of our guests did too. Just a real quick reminder, Museum Council has another virtual panel coming up on April 7th. I just dropped the link in the chat for you. And this panel will be about pursuits in DEAI. It's going to feature Bethany Chisholm from the Rosenbach, Alfonso Atkins from the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and Susan Schifrin from Arts Philadelphia, as we discuss what steps were taken in their organizations to have staff and audiences that reflect the communities they want to serve. If you've not yet signed up for this panel, I encourage you to do so. It should be a fantastic one. Just time check, it's about 8 minutes after 7. We're going to stop recording, but guests, if you want to stay for about 5 minutes, our panelists will be here to answer any last minute questions